Former Disney cast members of Reddit, what are some of your craziest, creepiest, best stories? So, this was a while ago now, but still makes me smiley and nostalgic. Character performers such as myself are only out during specific time slots during the day for pictures. When those times end, usually guests aren't allowed to enter the queue anymore, and we finish up taking photos with those remaining. Unfortunately, this day was particularly hot and fur characters had been experiencing issues, i.e. fainting, due to the heat, so they were packing us up rather quickly at the end of the shifts. Well, then Dale and I, Chip, were waving our goodbyes to the guests when we heard this child absolutely wailing her lungs out over not being able to meet us. She wasn't being bratty, she sounded genuinely upset. Well, my attendant is the best. The crowd had dispersed a bit and she was able to catch up with the parents. She found out they would be returning tomorrow, and since we all had shifts the following day, we pulled some things up to set up a small meeting. Here's how it went down. The parents, as instructed to, brought her to Critter Country a while before the first meet and greet of the day. I crept up behind her and gently put my paws over her eyes and pulled them back to reveal Dale, striking this wonderfully heroic pose in front of her. I still remember how she screamed in excitement when she realized her favorite Disney characters had come out just to spend some time with her. We gave her autographs and did photos, then spent the rest of the time playing tag. Next story. I worked at Hollywood Studios for more than a year while I went to UCF. The dumbest story I have is about a woman who exited the ride where I worked and discovered wet stuff coming from the sky. I was standing near stroller parking helping people organize strollers, so then the woman came up to me and told me that she didn't like the wet stuff coming from the sky and that I should tell my boss to turn it off. At first, I laughed because I thought she was kidding, which only pissed her off more, and she said, "Don't they know that this stuff happens and it ruins people's vacations?" Then I said, "We have no way of controlling the rain, ma'am. This is Florida and we get quick storms like this in the summer, but it might go away after a while. What about the bubble?" And then I was thoroughly confused by what she meant by bubble, so I had to ask what she meant by that, and apparently she thought that all Disney was under a big bubble and we controlled the weather like Risa on Star Trek. I then confirmed that there was no bubble, that this is the real deal. Then she walked away insisting that something should be done about it. But that's just one of the many, many stupid things that happened during my time as a CM. It was just one of the dumbest conversations I had. Okay, so I don't know about you guys, but I felt like I lost 1, maybe 2 IQ points reading that. Not a lot, but just enough for me to go, are you kidding? I don't know if I've just become numb to stupidity, but the Disney Dome? I don't know. Anyway, next story. So I have one moment that stands out above all the rest. I was waiting for someone to ask me this question. It's the reason I left a good job as a VIP tour guide and moved to the character department. So, I was working City Hall one day when 2 guests came in with 2 little girls. One was in a wheelchair and the other one looked like she had just seen death. Both were cut and bruised, and the one in the wheelchair had her arm in a cast. The 2 women were actually nurses from a hospital and were asking for a refund on the girls' tickets, something we avoided doing at all costs. When I asked why, they told me the story. The 2 girls were with their mom and dad at Epcot, and on the way home, they got into a horrible car accident. The mother was beheaded right in front of them. The father eventually died too, but the 2 girls didn't know that yet. They were from overseas and had no money and no contact information for anyone they knew. They were bringing the tickets back to get the girls some much-needed money to help them get back home. And my heart absolutely sunk. If you had seen these girls, you'd know why. They were truly traumatized. I refunded their tickets and got permission to be their private tour guide for the rest of the day, which they were not expecting. I walked them to the VIP viewing area for the parade, which was as far as I could walk them in the costume we used to wear at City Hall. Then I had to leave them there while I put on my VIP costume. On the way down, I pulled out every kid joke I could think of. I was a really good tour guide. I helped write part of it, and I know how to make kids smile, but nothing worked. These girls were too far gone for that. I left them at the bridge to go change, walked backstage, and I just bawled my eyes out. I just had never seen something so horrible. I was truly affected, and it was a terrible feeling of powerlessness, not being able to fix the situation. When I came back, I brought them to get ice cream, take them on rides and stuff, but they never smiled, not once. The nurses were loving it and were trying to get them into it, but it just wasn't working. We went back to the bridge to watch the parade, and it was there that I honestly saw true magic. Real magic, not bullcrap. I had called up the parade department to let them know what was going on and set up a private meet and greet after the parade. As the parade was coming around Liberty Square, I told the girls that I had called up Mickey and told him all about them. I told them that Mickey asked to meet them after the parade, and the little girl in the wheelchair smiled. "Really?" she asked, and my heart skipped a beat. And I said, "Yes, really. He told me to tell you to look out for him in the parade and to follow the float back to City Hall." Then the other girl smiled. "You mean right now?" she asked. And it had worked. They were talking. Not laughing, but talking. It was the first time I heard them speak. Every single parade performer came up to them on the bridge and told them to look out for Mickey. Every one of them told them that. When Mickey's float came up, Mickey, who was attached to a pole at the top of the float, managed to turn her body sideways, look down at the girls, and point towards Main Street. That was all it took. The girls were excited now. They had forgotten about death. They were lost in a magical world, and I couldn't believe I was watching it unfold in front of my eyes. So we followed that float all the way back to City Hall, singing Mickey Mania the whole way. Back then, City Hall used to have a VIP lounge behind the desk that was for privacy during difficult situations or to host celebrities. I took them in and showed them the book where all of the autographs were. They were eating it up. Then the girl who was Mickey that day got down off of her float and without even taking her head off, walked up to me backstage and said, "Let's go." I walked in with Mickey behind me, so I got to see the exact moment the girls met their new friend. They got shy, but Mickey was in control now. Those girls met the real Mickey Mouse that day. Every single parade character stayed dressed up to meet those girls. One by one, they would come in and play a bit, then leave. We were in that lounge for over an hour. Mickey stayed in costume the entire time, which is hard to do after a parade. When Mickey finally said goodbye, I had two excited girls on my hands that couldn't stop smiling. They talked and talked and talked. We had a wonderful day after that, but what I remember most is when we walked by the rose garden. The older girl said, "Oh, my mommy loves roses. And she stopped. I held out my hand and walked her to the gate, picked her up and put her on the other side and said, "Pick one." She looked happy as she picked out her favorite rose. She didn't say anything more, and she didn't need to. I said goodbye to the wonderful nurses and the wonderful girls, then walked backstage behind the train station. This time, I didn't cry. It felt so good to be a part of that. I realized that as much as I liked helping guests at City Hall, the true magic of Disney was in the character department. I auditioned, transferred, and never looked back. Thanks for letting me relive this. It was a special day for me. Next story. There weren't many of the creepy internet rumor type stories for me. I feel like a lot of those come from people who like the idea of a corrupted Disneyland. I will say though, some of the areas were really unsettling when they were empty and dark. Toontown was one, especially since it was always closing early. The twisted proportions are cartoony during the day, but when you're alone at night, it just feels really wrong. Like you might see a mascot running at you out of the dark. Next story. Not creepy in the traditional sense, just personally scary. I worked night shift at DAK and was working out of the safari at like 3 a.m. As I was struggling to get something working near the Hippo River, I heard one of the hippos do their crazy loud noise out of the pitch blackness like 5 feet away from me. I then had the terrifying realization that if I fell, I would most likely have been killed within a minute and wouldn't be discovered until the morning when they would find my truck on the ride path. I was much more careful in that area after that thought. Next story. I used to work at the box office. I once had a woman come up and ask for ticket info for Disneyland. She then placed a box on the counter while looking for her wallet. I don't know how she managed to get that box past security, but I see a picture on it, and then I see dates, and I realize that they are the ashes of assuming her little girl. I had to keep her at my window while I waited for security, but it broke my heart. But a lot of people like to dump ashes on rides, and it literally just gets vacuumed up at the end of the night. Next story. I was a CM from 2017 to 2014. It was said that there was a ghost of a little girl at Sorain on B-side. They say she died in the parking lot before DCA was built, but no one can say exactly how. Some people have claimed to hear footsteps coming up the metal stairs that lead directly below the screen during a flight. But the Tower CM is the only one there since the room is closed off during a flight, and an open door would stop it immediately. So imagine sitting there, basically turning out the show you've heard so many times, and you start hearing metallic footsteps. It's dark, you feel like you're being watched. Very uneasy feeling. Next story. Of course, I don't work there, but my aunt and uncle do. Uncle told us that among the bitter employees, Mickey is referred to as the Rat. My favorite tidbit is that because nothing bad is supposed to happen in Disney, there's weird euphemisms for a lot of things. If there needs to be a puke cleanup at one of the rides, it's called a protein spill. Next story. I'm surprised no one has mentioned Towel Baby. Most people who worked at WWMK in the early 2000s had or met Towel Baby. It's a rather sad story, so I'll try to tell it respectfully. Several times a week, a couple with annual passes came to the Magic Kingdom with what appeared to be a swaddled infant. However, if you looked closely, the woman was carrying a rolled-up towel wrapped in a hospital newborn blanket. The man was also always very gentle. leading his wife through security and into the park. I'm not certain if they went on rides, but I know for sure that they always asked for a table for 3 at restaurants. They came through my turnstile a few times, and while the woman rarely made eye contact, they were always soft-spoken and respectful, but the story or legend was that the couple had lost an infant years prior, and the woman fell into a deep depression and became delusional. The only thing that kept her somewhat functional was fussing over this towel and coming to the Magic Kingdom. Treat them both with respect, and observing them navigate the park was a masterclass in compassion. Not only watching the husband care for his wife, but seeing every single cast member treat them both with respect and kindness. I remember managers telling us not to make fun of them, obviously, but also not to fuss over them. They're just another family enjoying the park. Next story. Creepiest. Got deployed. They needed people, so they moved me there to Animal Kingdom for a week. I was at the dinosaur ride as merchandise and was leaving at night when everything was stocked and clean. Forgot where I was for a second when I heard screeching noises. They still haven't turned off the dinosaur noises, and it was pitch black outside. Then craziest, worked at Club Cool and Epcot, had a Brazilian father pull down his daughter's pants and let her pee on our floor. Then at another club, a cool one, people would try Beverly, Italy's soda, and instead of puking in the trash, they would puke on the soda machine and we would have to shut it down and clean it up. Then one time got asked about putting the dome up when it was raining. Then when working at the Mission Space gift shop, I had a 3-hour standoff with a guest who was stealing merchandise. And then my last official day working at Animal Kingdom before getting transferred to the Grand Floridian Resort was the opening day of Pandora at Animal Kingdom. I worked 17 hours that day. The wait time to get into Pandora from the Discovery Island Bridge was 5 hours, and then another 5 hours wait time to ride the Banshee ride. And then lots and lots of drunk people when I worked at Epcot. So everyone, I must tell you I have never been to Disneyland or Disney World in my lifetime. I came from a family where affording that was just out of the question, just never came up, don't even bother. Not everyone can afford Disney, but I will say, I don't know what Epcot is, so I looked it up and every picture is just of a giant golf ball on images. What is Epcot? I'm sure I'll sit down and read about it for a minute, but just all the pictures are of this giant ball, so I don't know. Are people getting drunk by the ball? I'm assuming there's more to it likely, but it's just funny, that's all I see. But anyway, next story. So, former employee here, but not of the parks themselves. We were given a tour backstage at Disneyland, and I have an image burned into my mind that I have never had escape me. It was of a clothing rack, one on wheels placed back behind the Tower of Terror. On it, placed on hooks, were about 10 Mickey Mouse heads that must have been either drying or done after a wash or moving to a new location. But the blood orange sunset combined with the tower and what appeared to be decapitated Mickey heads hanging from hooks is a fond, creepy memory. Next story. Not a worker, but my husband and I had passes there and would go bi-weekly. We saw 2 grown men fight over the last seat of a tram. One was with his family and the other was alone. It was midnight, everyone was tired, and there was a lot of people, but trams come every 5 minutes, so no biggie. But the man who was alone was not going to wait 5 minutes and ripped the father out of his seat so he can get go. Cue what my dear and I call the tram fight. The father tried to fight the man to get back with his family, but the other guy was not having it. A cast member and another security guard had to push the man off of the father. They helped the father back on with his family and told the man to walk back to the parking lot. Now, the walk back to the parking lot means walking around the tram pickup. Halfway through downtown Disney, outside of the park and back to the parking lot, takes about 10 minutes. We've done it a million times, but it feels like an hour if it's midnight and you've been walking since 8 a.m. But you can spot the Disney collection of stray cats that keep the rodent population down. They are only seen at early or late hours, so the man had to walk back to the parking lot, and it was great. Next story. My aunt from the Philippines, she used to own a little hot dog cart that was a few hundred yards away from the entrance to the Orlando Disney in Florida. Every time I visited her, she would get me into the park, and this was being the 70s. I didn't need a parent to go with me. The craziest thing I ever saw was on this little Mark Twain trail in Frontierland. I was walking by myself and stuffing glob after glob of cotton candy into my yap hole when all of a sudden I got the urge to go number 2. Now, I was only 11, but had an idea of just how bad it would be to dump in my pants, so I dropped trow. I squeezed my little rump cheeks through the fence surrounding a donkey on the trail and splurted out a creepy amount of liquid hell scallions. I had nothing to wipe with except the cotton candy bag. Meanwhile, I hear a commotion up ahead and it's 2 workers dressed in safari gear walking towards me. I pull up my pants and casually lean against the fence like I'm just watching this donkey do nothing. Next thing I know, the workers have gloves on and are examining my poop, talking about how the donkey has a terrible illness again. What a life. Next story. I worked at a restaurant in downtown Disney in California as a host. James Spader came in one time, tried to get a table with his dog, who was obviously not a service dog. And even if it was an emotional support dog, they don't have to be legally allowed inside of a restaurant. So I told him I would be happy to seat him if he left his dog at the kennel, right across the esplanade. But I could not seat his dog inside. What if a health inspector came in? And he yelled at me so much his face turned red. He told my manager to fire me. Luckily, the restaurant had a patio, and the manager sat Spader at a table on the patio closest to the exit so we wouldn't get in trouble. But my manager actually stood up for me, told Spader I was right. Spader still tried to get me fired. This was 10 years ago. I still hate James Spader with a red-hot passion. Such an entitled ass. And since he always plays a-holes, I know he's not even a good actor. However, Christian Slater was very polite when he came in. Next story. There might not be a lot of responses to this. Disney is kind of a stickler when it comes to having its employees sign NDAs, so even the general staff and costumed characters at the parks have to sign them. Disney, though, has always been real big on that magician mentality where if you know the inner workings, the magic is dispelled. That just happens to go hand in hand with protecting the business, image, bottom line. Bonus anecdote, however, I got to go to Pasadena my freshman year in high school to march in the Rose Parade, and we also marched in the closing parade at Disneyland one of those nights we were there, so in the same week, I took the backlot tour at Universal and got to go behind the scenes at Disneyland. It was an eye-opening and worldview shrinking experience and a lot of fun for a bunch of high school kids. Next story. Not so much behind the scenes stuff, but one of my favorite stories. I worked at Epcot for 8 years, and this happened sometime in the early 90s. There was a couple from somewhere in the Midwest that had driven to Miami to adopt a disabled child, their 9th, I think. On the way home, they decided to stop at Disney World for the kids. After pulling into the Epcot parking lot, their handy van caught on fire. They got all of the kids out, but the van was a total loss. So Disney put them all up in one of their hotels while the couple tried to figure out what to do next. Turns out, there was a convention of Rotary International at the Swan Hotel. One of the members saw the story on the news, and at breakfast the next morning passed the hat among the members. They ended up collecting enough to buy the couple a brand new van, extra equipment for all of the kids, and a hefty check left over. I've always held a certain amount of pride in the Rotary Club for this amazing generosity. Next story. Seeing the characters sat on the lunch table in the tunnels of Magic Kingdom with their heads off, knowing that the Tinkerbell that flies out of the castle in a steel cable is a short Korean man. That the face characters, people whose faces you can see, especially the princesses, are the most arrogant people I have ever met. Then, this one time, guests pulled me over into the woman's bathroom because some crazy B-word was hitting her effing kid inside the stall, and the kid was wailing, and they wanted me to intervene because the woman was Hispanic. I don't speak Spanish. Security was called. It was effed. No idea what happened to the kid. And to be honest, I have much more good stories than bad stories. The place I worked in was actually super crappy with crappy managers, but Disney is a nice place to work. They actually do give a crap about their guests. It's not just a front, and I liked that. Next story. Former photographer at Disney World and worked very closely with the characters. There were some creepy regulars. There were this couple who'd pretty much come in every day and would get super mushy with the cast members, like a first-name basis kind of thing, and they would make sure to catch the specific performers during their set. And no one knows how they know this info. We think they just stalk them. Some CMs think it's harmless, but I think it's incredibly odd. They even expect some special treatment because they are regulars. I've only encountered them a couple of times, but they managed to find me on Facebook just based off of my name tag info. Next story. Friends with a Disney employee. The workers are paid below living wage, but many are so obsessed with Disney culture that they would rather be poor than work elsewhere, especially the young ones. Many spend their off days at the park too. Disney takes advantage of this totally for sure. It's a very cult-like place for employees, with many of them having getting out and life after Disney stories. Next story. As a Space Mountain cast member at WDW, we would all rotate positions every 45 minutes. I was at load, where people start the ride, and this guy was very nervous in line, arguing with his friends in another language, maybe Portuguese. But he got on the rocket, even though he seemed nervous, and before I sent him off, I made sure he wanted to go. He nodded and continued into light speed, 27 miles per hour, by the way, and after a few minutes, the ride was emergency stopped, and a code that was familiar but I couldn't recognize was called over the intercom. I then saw my supervisor sprinting downstairs to the doors to the ride. he has gotten off the ride. You see, at the beginning of the ride, you were going pretty slow as you climbed the coaster. He had just decided to get off. The creepy part of this story is that we all searched the building for about an hour. Lights on, about 50 people searching, and no one found him. So this man got off the ride, went down about 200 steps, and somehow found the exit, never to be seen by us again. Edit. To those thinking this is fake, that's cool. You didn't work there, and the lap bars are super easy to slip out of since the ride isn't very fast and it doesn't go upside down or anything. Why he did it, I'll never know, as it's more dangerous to do that than ride the ride. It was spring of 2012. Next story. So, don't want to out who I am, but I used to work as a host at a restaurant on Main Street at DL. I have so many stories. One woman came up and asked where the bathrooms were, so I told her. She then decided that the line was too long, so she just tried to pull down her pants and pee in the lobby. Security came very quickly. Then, a lot of people try and spread their loved ones' ashes at DL. It's very popular in the rivers of America. I've never seen it, but apparently security stops someone once a week. Next story. So, I had a woman who was so unbelievably angry at my hotel. I honestly don't remember why. That she was literally screaming at my supervisor that it would just take one military B-word like her to bring Disney World to its knees, she said. This was almost 10 years ago, so I forget most of the story now, but I recall she had a giant trash bag of merch. And I think she was angry about a long-distance bill charge too. It was genuinely so insane. Next story. I knew a woman who played a female character from an animated film. She, and presumably many of other such actresses, have to fend off countless come-ons from adult males, often with their kids and even wives nearby, without breaking character. There are security guards watching such actresses discreetly, but they are not far, and they will have a chat with the most persistent. Next story. Lived in Hong Kong for 3 years. Out for drinks one night, and my friend and I decide to talk to these two girls. We did Jello shots, we drink vodka shots. We find out they are two Snow Whites from Hong Kong Disney. So we go to karaoke and drink whiskey. Everyone is wasted and it's 5 a.m. We decide to go to a 24-hour diner. Snow White 1 nails getting out of the cab and blasts one of her front teeth out. F, man. Snow White 2 panics and realizes that she will now have to go to work, but lives near the China border, nearly an hour away. She asks me to help her, and the night splits. My friend takes Snow White 1 to the hospital. I take Snow White 2 into a cab for an hour to the China border. She is barfing the whole time into a bag. It smells awful. Then it's 6 a.m. and we're at her place. I sit in the cab while she goes to get her dress. 10 minutes pass by. I go inside and Snow White 2 is hugging the toilet. Part of her Snow White dress is actually in the toilet. I wring it out. We grab the dress and stop at a 7-Eleven for some Gatorade. It's 7 a.m. and the sun up. Snow White is putting up makeup in the car. She barfs out the window. The fare is now over 1,100 HKD, which is $140. We arrive at the park and kids are there. She is worried because the dress is never supposed to leave the park and management will see her. So she takes it off and stuffs it into a bag, puts on her gym clothes from her duffel. Taxi driver watches from the mirror. I look away. Then I drop her off at Disney at 7:45. There is vomit on her dress. Snow White 1 has stitches put in her mouth, and my friend dates her once. And I never see my princess ever again. Next story. Former Walt Disney World merchandise cast member here. Was on the Disney College program last fall. I worked primarily in the Star Tours gift shop, tattooing traders. This is one of my best stories. So, we had several autographed pictures behind the counter. Luke, Han, Leia, and Chewie was $10,000. I was on the register near the pictures when this older gentleman asked me how much the centerpiece was. I told him $10,000, sir, and he looked at me and said, "That would look great in my theater room. How many do you have in stock?" And I said 2, including the one on display. And he said, "Perfect, I'll take both." The total after taxes was a bit over $20,000. I was a bit flustered swiping that credit card. And I know there are some rich people out there, but never really got to see it firsthand. My favorite part is that as I offered to ship it home for him, he says, "No thanks, I brought my plane with me." Next story. I used to work in the stores in DCA. We had closed for the night and I had just fixed the lollipop tree. I walk across the room to straighten the embroidery counter when I hear this clunk behind. Turning around, I see one of the lollipops on the top had jumped and landed a foot to the left of the tree. No one was around and it happened within seconds of me being at the counter. A lot of crazy and funny things have happened to me while working there. However, that was the only crazy thing. I miss being there. The 2 tips I can give to you if you're visiting the parks: 1. Be kind to the cast members, and 2. Be extra careful with the costume characters. We do get hurt a lot by guests. Next story. This isn't a creepy story, but a horrifying one. I was working the day of the Columbia accident. I tried to find my telling of the story in my post history, but I'm on mobile and it's taking me too long. But In 1998, on Christmas Eve, a cleat ripped off the ship as it was docking. The clear sling shouted through the crowd, nearly decapitating a guest in front of his kids. It was terrifying, not knowing what was happening or who was affected. I can only imagine how the CMs felt when the America Sings accident happened. Next story. I worked at the Haunted Mansion at Magic Kingdom in 2012 as an international CP. Heard some good stories from other cast members which may or may not be true. In the room with all of the door knockers, there's a door you can actually go through with a vent and you can look into the ride. During grad nights, a cast member would watch through the vent to make sure there wasn't any funny business. Then apparently one night, some girl was going down on a guy and the older maid behind the door shouted at her to stop that, and the girl bit down hard. Then this story happened to me, but there are a lot of set pressure mats and sensors on the ride, so if anyone steps out of the ride, it stops. One day, I was at what's called Load 2, which is basically the last person you see before you enter the ride on the buggy. This position, we would check the buggies have closed and would stop or start the ride and make announcements. Then one day, the ride stops due to someone setting off a sensor. I checked the monitor to see what it is. Cause Safe D belongs with me, so we have to go into the ride and make sure it's all clear. I go into the ride and find the area where the sensor got triggered. I asked around, and this older man calls me over and says his daughter got out and went through one of the emergency exit doors. I quickly go through and check outside, and I see someone walking away. I shout out to him if he's seen anyone, and he says no. I get on the phone to one of the supervisors who says, if you can't see anyone, tell the old man to check in with us once he gets off. Anyway, the old man never spoke to anyone else. Not sure if he was just loopy or what. There's also a book in one of the areas which has a whole bunch of stuff in it from cast members. When I was there, it has a drag photo of someone, amongst other things. Next story. I got two different people banned for life from Disney, both in the same store in a 1-month period. One was trying to return stolen merchandise for credit, the other was stealing pins. So the dumbass stealing pins actually used their credit card to purchase something else, and my investigative skills came into work. Found all of the receipts from the time of the theft, looked them up on Facebook, and found the girl. More people in their party came in later to steal more, and the guy involved this time was wearing the exact shirt from his Facebook picture. I alerted our management, who clearly alerted security, and guests ended up being charged to their rooms for the pins that were stolen, and asked to never return to WDW property. Then the other story is during my time at the front desk. There was this woman who was wreaking havoc all over our property. Her magic file, think Disney permanent record, was as long as a mile and traversed parks and resorts. Some of the stories were bonkers. This woman left her service dog in her room all day while they were at the park. She complained that she was allergic to onions after ordering French onion soup, and let her dog relieve itself in the lobby of Wilderness Lodge, and said that it wasn't her mess to clean up. And yeah, after so long, security finally came to her room and informed her that she was no longer allowed on the property. She is banned for life. Next story. I grew up in the Orlando area, and I was a lifeguard at Typhoon Lagoon during summers when I was in college at U of Florida. One night, during closing duties, I was picking, which is to say I was walking around with a trash bag picking up whatever trash I found. And what did I find in the middle of the queue line for one of the rides? A giant pile of human poo. Somebody had taken a massive dump in the middle of the line shortly before closing. I won the rock, paper, scissors with my buddies, so he had to go clean it up. Next story. I fell in the rivers of America working on the canoes on my first day in attractions. They said nobody had fallen into the river in years. I just tell myself that's not true. Maybe 12 minutes into my first day, dunked into the green abyss. It took me days to get that smell of duck crap out of my hair. And man, I forgot about people dumping their loved ones' ashes in there too. But I got my new costume and proceeded to slip in the canoe on my very next trip and slam my head against a seat, knocked myself out cold. They sent me up to medical, and that was my last day on the canoes. Then, on my last day, it was one of the busiest days in the park up to that point ever. I was walking from the canoes to backstage. I see someone in the skyway standing up, and I look up, and he jumps out into a tree. This is no small feat, by the way. You had to go over a taller set of rails and then squeeze out. He landed in a tree in Tomorrowland, tumbled down to the seat that was attached to a planter, and just kind of sat there. I walked off stage and never looked back. But I made so many amazing friends there. It really is a great job and even a career if you want it to be. And also, does the super politically incorrect Disney we own the whole world and everything in it sign still exist in Village House? Next story. Had a couple of people in New Year's Eve go in a certain dark and secluded location to go and have sex. In Epcot, in Disney World. Also was working backstage and went to go test a CO2 tank to see if it was full. It was full. I only found out because it exploded in my face and started spurting CO2 like a hydrant. Told my managers and they didn't did nothing. Not even an incident report, which is part of the reason I would never go back. Then, also, not me, but my roommate worked at Tower of Terror. They had a problem with people taking light bulbs from the room before you get on the ride. One day, they found people that took the light bulbs as they were getting on the ride. A bunch of drunk high school girls had shattered them in their hands and then planned on letting them go on the ride. And for what reason, you ask? To see what would happen, of course. I have plenty more if I really think about it, but PM me if you want any more crazy Disney World stories. Next story. I worked at the stunt show in Hollywood Studios last year, and we always had to stay open past 2 a.m. some nights for private events. Most of these were for cheerleading groups who would rent out the park, and our theater became a dance party, which was annoying but not really too bad. But the worst part was about every 30 minutes we'd have to walk through our theater's queue because teenagers would sneak into the trees and just go at it. One night, a fellow cast member and I caught 6 different couples within the span of 2 hours, and I had to report them to their captains, which was always the most uncomfortable situations. Next story. I used to work in the stores, and there was this one guy who came in and sat with a little girl, who was left alone in the theater by her nanny, and started asking her weird questions like who she's with and how old she is. It wasn't until my fellow cast member, also a guy, noticed and approached them that the guy stood up and left immediately. Then, we also had another incident where a guest complained to one of my stage leads that there was a man going around and asking children how old they were. Turns out he didn't know the size of his own kid's feet and was trying to find another kid who was the same age to figure it out. My stage lead pretty much yelled at the guy. Next story. So many good stories for you, but I'll start with my all-time favorite. In 2008, I worked at the Bibbidi Bibbidi Boutique inside of the castle at the Magic Kingdom. You know, the place where princess makeovers happen. Most days, I performed the actual makeovers, telling girls, and sometimes older women back then when it was allowed, stories while I did their hair, nails, and makeup. Stories like I did Cinderella's hair this morning, along with Hannah Montana who sat over there in X chair. Remember, this was 2008, Hannah Montana was huge. And the moms would always then, without fail, turn to their daughters, husbands, and exclaim, "Did you hear that, honey? She did Hannah Montana's hair." After which, I wouldn't have the heart to correct them and say, "She's as fake as Cinderella," but I'd just smile and play along. Well, some days though, I would get lucky and work the front podium checking guests in. This was a highly coveted spot and hard to get. My favorite dumb guest story happened on one of those days. Please keep in mind, there is no alcohol sold in the Magic Kingdom. So here's the setup. Guest comes straggling over, looking beat up and tired and overheated. I check their princess, as each girl was referred to in, and they lean in very, very close to me, and I ask if they need something.
Hey, where can I get a beer in the Magic Kingdom?
"I'm sorry, sir, but we don't sell beer in the Magic Kingdom. If you want a beer, you can head over to any other park or hotel."
Okay, but really, where can I get a beer in the Magic Kingdom?
"I'm sorry, sir, but we don't have any beer in the Magic Kingdom." Then he looks around from side to side, moving in closer still.
This is the Magic Kingdom, right?
"Yes, sir."
So if I go over to Tomorrowland, can I get a beer there?
"I'm sorry, sir, but we don't serve beer in the Magic Kingdom." And at this point, I'm struggling to repeat myself with a smile. Then he starts winking at me while equally getting annoyed.
Okay, I'll go over to Tomorrowland then.
Then the guest storms off, leaving me bewildered. I'll never know if he found his beer or not, but if he did, it wasn't in Tomorrowland. I have plenty more crazy, funny, heartwarming, and scary stories if you're interested. So I do have to say one thing about the people who play characters at Disney. I have so much respect for them for not breaking character. If I was a professional wrestler, I'd be like MJF or The Undertaker. I don't want to break character. I know it's hard, but I just want to live a lie. I want to be a carny. And as for you, fellow viewers, maybe I'm not even American. Maybe this is my fake accent and I'm actually from the UK and I've been lying this whole time because it's so fun to talk in a fake American accent. Anyway, next story. So, I worked as a cast member in Magic Kingdom, Stands East, Tomorrowland, and Fantasyland. Whenever taking a break backstage, I would get an earful from the face characters, most notably Bert from Mary Poppins making out with Aladdin and scheduling sex later that day. Also, Cinderella half-dressed, smoking a cigarette, talking about how some people could be going down on her, hidden in her skirt, without anyone knowing, while signing autographs. I've also chatted up Minnie Mouse, who told me she has been peed on, thrown up, kicked, bitten, hit, and stabbed by kids over the course of 8 years as a fur character. Next story. Copied from a longer story of mine elsewhere, Casey tells me that the other vendors have clogged the industrial garbage disposal at the rear of the building. Being the proud cast member that I am, as well as being a steward lead, I take it upon myself to go check out the damage. And Casey was right. As I approach the area, I can see that there's standing water in the shallow sink that the garbage disposal is located in. The water is one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen. Floating on top are bloated pieces of churros with shiny specks of cinnamon sugar still attached. I guess I do mix the sugar really well. And the water has a gleam of grease from forgotten turkey legs along with bits of old pretzels floating besides the churro pieces. All of this mixed with what seems to be someone's failed attempt at washing dishes, as there is gray soap bubbles attached to the corners of the sink. Most likely, something is just clogging the drain, and all it'll take is a quick clearing with the hand. I've decided that I will not be the one to push my hand down the drain, though. Not because of the off chance the disposal will suddenly turn on like some scary movie, but because I really didn't think I'd ever get the turkey leg smell off of my hand and arm. I really don't feel like being mauled by some random dog either that may or may not suddenly appear because my appendage smells like kibbles and bits. So, like any typical group of guys, Fish, Steve, and myself figure out that we can take care of this problem pretty quickly with no help from professionals. Our first idea of flipping the switch a few times doesn't work, and we start to brainstorm on other ideas. KC isn't amused and tells us she's going to put a work order in with our manager, Kim. We nod in agreement, but as she starts to walk off, I tell her we can get it fixed before they even get out here. Looking directly at the turkey grease abyss, I motioned for a broom, while KC, not wanting to get in the way of guy time or be a witness to the stupidity that is surely going on to ensure, quickly walks away. So the three of us try every trick we could think of, from hitting the disposal with a broomstick to using the industrial glove to loosen up whatever was lurking in the deep. Nothing is working, and those bloated churros are still just hanging around at the top of the water. They're looking more like sewage than a delicious treat right now, and desperate times call for desperate measures. Having deployed each and every home remedy we could think of, it was time to get a bit more creative. The industrial glove, normally used to deal with harsh chemicals, left the user with no feeling, and it was decided that maybe a regular latex glove would be a better idea. I quickly bowed out because I didn't want the turkey grease to be stuck in my arm hair. That stuff does not come out easily, and I didn't want to smell like turkey parts and a dirty oven. So it was down to Fish and Steve. If they really wanted to be the hero, they needed to take that extra step and endure the floating churro carcass, as well as the turkey-greased glazed cream cheese pretzel bits and whatever else was living in the murky water. Then Steve, who has no reason to do this because he is by far the prettiest out of all of us, decides that he'll be the one that they'll cheer for and grabs a few dozen gloves and a rubber band from the yellow room. He starts to layer the gloves and then proceeds to wrap the rubber band around his wrist so none of the brown water will spill into the glove and spoil his hand. And we point out that the glove isn't long enough to protect his arm, but Steve shrugs and dips his hand in anyway, in the water, trying to stretch his fingers to reach the drain. His attempt doesn't work, of course, and thanks to some juvenile talk, we get him to put his whole arm in the dark abyss that has become the sink. Steve, he doesn't have the longest arms though. The water is dangerously close to his short sleeve shirt. We lend a hand and roll up the sleeve to give him more arm to get to the root of the problem. Steve is really trying to find the problem until his own problem happens. Arm deep in what could pass as a sewage leak, Steve proclaims his hand is stuck. Now, there is a program in all of the brains of man that runs when a friend has his hand stuck in a garbage disposal. The program tells the unstuck friend to quickly run to the switch and try to flip it before the stuck friend can rescue himself. Steve is able to pull his hand free though before we can turn on the disposal. We're crushed and fresh out of ideas to fix the situation. And there's no reason to try again because no one else wants to touch anything that is coming from that sink. And we've already risked a coworker comp claim just because we wanted to do something that wasn't our job. We're defeated, and those churros and pretzel bits covered in turkey grease and sugar are mocking us while they swim around in the sink. Standing there, we shared a collective thought. Something really needed to be done to the right injustices. That moment, our next logical idea came to us. We could fix the problem pretty easily if we could only see what the problem was. So in the age of heroes, we grow up believing that there are moments that define you. Moments where you either become a villain or become the hero. There are also moments where you become the butt of a joke or the legend of an entire people. That is, if you choose to do something in that moment. And I blame Steve for what happened next. If it wasn't for him saying, "I think I could see it if I can," and so on and so forth, none of what is told next would have happened. And I'm not sure how he finished his sentence because Fish and I both ran towards the cotton candy wagon and grabbed a bag. The bags were big, thick, and clear. We knew they'd fit over our heads because the girls would use them backstage to cover their hair while making cotton candy, or we'd use them as rain hats for no reason at all. The idea was foolproof and genius. The only part we weren't sure of is if Steve's hair, styled in spikes with lots of hair gel and any other product a teenager could get their hands on, would poke a hole in the bag. So, with a little coaxing, we assured him that the bag wouldn't pop and verified that there were no existing holes which would allow the filthy water to enter. Steve placed it carefully around his manicured spikes to his forehead as we stood near the sink, which would be doubling as a murky shipwreck needing to be explored shortly. But thus, A hero was born as Steve pulled down the bag over his face and dipped his head all the way into the sink. I got close to ensure that the water stayed out of the bag and Steve wouldn't drown. A slight want to stir the water enough to allow a few drops to enter the plastic helmet that Steve so valiantly put on came over me, but I resisted the urge. Then, Steve's head movements under the water had Fish and I in tears with laughter as we moved away from the sink. We were both afraid that when Steve came back up from his scuba diving mission, we'd be sprayed with the disgusting water. And our laughter filled the entire area. So much that we didn't hear Casey telling Kim how gross the water that lay stagnant in the sink was as they were coming around the corner. Kim and Casey stopped dead in their tracks, looking directly at the newly crowned Scuba Steve, still moving his head side to side under the water with churros moving around in the sink. But our laughter quickly ended as Fish and I backed away, pointing and shaking our heads at Steve submerged in the tank. We did our best to convey that while what was going on was funny, we were in no way a part of what was happening. As we kept walking backwards, trying to be innocent, Scuba Steve surfaced and removed the bag in one quick action, looking directly at us with a victorious smile. Our faces immediately told him, however, all he needed to know. Doing a quick pivot to his left, head held high, he looked straight at Kim and said,
It's clogged and I couldn't see anything.
He turns back to the right and he walks towards us in triumph, as Kim had no choice but to shake his own head in disbelief and go back the way he came. Okay, so maybe you guys enjoyed that story, maybe you didn't, but could we maybe agree that it probably didn't need to be this long? This reminds me of a few years ago where I had a monologue phase where I would monologue and tell stories similar to this, and then my friend said, Kevin, get on with it. And I was like, okay, yeah, monologue phase is dead. Sometimes people just like brevity, clarity, quick to the point, the anti-yap technique. I'm a yapper, but I appreciate quickness. But anyway, next story. So my adopted grandma, old lady neighbor that I've grown with, was overpronouncing deaths at Disney World at a time. A lot of things went by without others knowing. The thing is, they usually don't pronounce dead at the park as it's bad on the image, so even if someone was decapitated, smashed, splattered, etc., she wouldn't pronounce them dead until they were off of Disney property. With this said, this was decades ago, and Disney is safer. Next story. So, somebody talked about a ghost inside one of the theaters at Soarin' in Disney California Adventure. I hadn't heard that the ghost was there, but at It's Tough to Be a Bug instead. And if you're unfamiliar with it, it's a vaguely Bugs Life themed 3D show with animatronics and 4D effects. I've heard from numerous cast members who've worked with it that it was haunted, and it sounds like it may be the same little girl from Soarin'. So the line to get down into the waiting area and of the theater is the winding hallway that looks like it's under a tree. At the end of the hallway is the entrance to the waiting area and a CM at a podium handing out glasses. I've heard stories from that the CM at the podium will sometimes see a little girl run down, round the corner, and stop and stare at the CM and just go back up. They say it's always the same girl. I've heard stories of the black window animatronics just dropping from their spots in the ceiling when the attraction's not running or on. I've heard giant hopper animatronics would sometimes hop out of his hiding spot under the same conditions too. There's also supposedly a darkish hallway that goes around the back of the theater that a lot of CMs refuse to take. I had one friend who worked at Post about how she's never taking that hallway again, and how she was going to try and trade out all of her shifts there if she could. I never actually worked it, so it's all secondhand info. Well, folks, we are at the end of the video. We have read so many peculiar, but also not that crazy Disney stories. The decapitating one with the little girls. Yes, I had to stop and cry for a bit. But the rest I could handle, and also we got a nice little paranormal story at the end because we have so many of those on this channel, don't we? But anyway, guys, thank you all so much for watching, commenting, have a really good day, and bye-bye!